You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Well, hello, Kylie. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm super excited to be here.
I feel like this is going to be a conversation of opposites because you're almost a professional beginner and I am so loath to do things where I'm going to look or feel like an idiot. So the episode is about beginner's mind, but I think we'll talk about some wider concepts than that, about being an actual beginner to get us started. And when I first met you, I remember you were really diligently working on your handstand practice. And then since then, I've been watching you on social media, learn how to surf and, tackle all kinds of really meaty challenges with a trainer in the gym, and then learn how to roller skate and enter in adult competitions. So what is it about being a beginner that sort of excites you and terrifies me? What is it about that makes it difficult for adults to become beginners at things, I guess, is my first question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the big thing is that as we get older, we get in our comfort zones and we kind of like create almost like a box of like, this is safe, this is comfortable, I feel good, I don't feel like a dick. And it gets harder to kind of push those boundaries a little, and it gets more, the fear and the monkey mind gets more involved. And there's always, the stories about, well, what if I fall, and what if I fail, and what if this, and what if that, and that becomes almost kind of deafening to actually taking that first leap. Yeah. And I think like for me, so my dad actually had a struggle with Parkinson's and died just a few years ago. And I think watching that also had a bit of an impact on me where, I would watch him, kind of struggle even just for basic movement sometimes, and, would be falling all the time, but he would just get back up and try again, get back up and try again. And it just kind of really made me think, here I am afraid to do these things. But why? I've only got this one life, this one chance to really make a go of it. And I think, just seeing his struggle and the fact that he would just get up and keep going and get up and keep going. I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna, keep putting the brakes on things. I'm gonna go out and tackle those fears. And, since doing that, it's been a real eye opener because, like the handstands, that actually started as, I guess my first big challenge, and I realized at that point in time, I had the whole story around it about why I couldn't handstand and why like everybody else could handstand and not me. And, and then I just goes like, actually, I think it's just a story, I just actually need to do it. And and that's what I found with a lot of these challenges is that, when I first go, oh, maybe I'll try, there's that moment of like fear, of apprehension of like, ooh, what if I'm no good? Or what if this, what if that? And then it's just that moment of like, okay, well, that's the story. What if I'm really good? I saw this great meme, I think the other day, and it had a person on the cliff and it was like, what if this happens? And it was, the person kind of falling, into the water. And then the other part side was the person flying. And it was like, but what if it's this? And I think so often we go for the negative rather than the, what if I am really good? Or what if it is really fun? Or what if I do find something new? So
I love that. I feel like you've already answered my next question, which was all about, it's nice here in my comfort zone. I like it here. It's cozy. And if I do something new, it's hard. It's frustrating. There's a lot of wasted time and energy. And maybe I feel like a dick. Maybe I'm not even worried about how I look to other people, but I feel incompetent. And I love that you've already right from the outset talked about that's such a small price to pay when we have options. Your dad didn't have options. He had to get up and keep trying.
Mm.
While we have so many options and the impact is really low and the consequences are low, kind of why not? I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real I think that fear of failure and fear of not being good straight away
Mm-hmm.
stops people,
Mm.
and doing these new things. I've realized, you really do kind of suck a little at first,
Yeah.
and you do feel uncoordinated, and there is that kind of like gangliness, but there's such a reward if you just keep showing up. And it's like that, the in the Yoga Sutras they talk about abhyasa and
Mm.
vairaja, and that idea that we just keep showing up, we put in the effort, the consistent practice over time, and the fruits kind of reveal themselves. And I definitely feel that for myself. It's like, that first awkward moment when you're the beginner and,
Mm-hmm.
learning the new skill and your brain trying to create all the neuromuscular pathways. And then, when you get that first, moment where you balance, or, you ride that wave, and then it's like, oh, wow, big dopamine hit. And then it almost like
Huge.
inspires you to keep going. So,
Yes.
yeah.
I love that. I mean, I'm already seeing so many tie-ins to yoga practice, even just with that awareness of those samskaras, those stories that we get stuck in, the grooves that we get stuck in, where we're telling ourselves things that may or may not have any connection to reality. But because we don't step out of them, we never really get the chance to challenge them. So we keep making that groove kind of deeper and deeper and deeper, and making it feel more
Yeah,
and more true, even though we might be awesome, or we might continue to suck, but actually have a lot of fun doing it. We don't actually have to
exactly.
be good at everything. You don't have
Exactly.
to become a professional skater to support yourself. It's
No,
okay if you just have fun with it.
exactly. Exactly.
So, what
Yeah.
are some of the benefits that you've seen, and you've mentioned some already, of repeatedly exposing yourself to being a beginner? What are some of the takeaways that you've really enjoyed?
I think it's that, like, learning something new has been,
Mm-hmm.
I forgot how much of a kind of dopamine you hit every time you achieve something new. It's like, oh, wow, I
Mm.
never thought I could do this. And then all of a sudden I'm doing it. Um, and like I guess, like, I'm a big believer in the body and the mind. So the mind being neuroplastic, the body being bioplastic. So, the more we challenge and try new things, the more our body adapts and grows. And
Mm.
so, they used to think that the brain basically, once you got to a certain age, that was it. It was declining. Um, See you later kind of thing. But now they're like, no, 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 actually, you're forever making new neural pathways if you are, putting yourself in those opportunities to create new neural pathways. And same with
Yes.
the body, like, our bones get stronger when we challenge them, with weightlifting or jumping, or, those things that actually bring compression to the bones and stimulate bone growth. And same with our muscles, like, they get stronger. Our fascia gets stronger when we stimulate and, provide new opportunities for growth. And
Mm.
I'm a big believer that our brain and our body loves the variety and the learning new things, and that just keeps us kind of growing and adapting and becoming more resilient. And
Yeah.
um
You're talking
yeah,
about
so
the old can't teach an old dog new tricks, except even with
yes,
dogs, you actually can teach an old dog new tricks. And now we know that you can do that with older humans as well, thank goodness. Yeah.
yes,
You talked about
exactly.
kind of physical challenges forcing our body to adapt physically
Mm,
to become stronger or more supple or more adaptable or more agile or whatever. And I think the same process must occur mentally as well, that there's a kind of mental compression. You can feel the
mm.
costliness of all of the new pathways that you're making, trying to do something that your teacher makes look really easy and for you is really
Yes.
hard. You can feel the mental
Yes.
cost of that as compression, but over time, that makes your emotional body and your brain stronger, more adaptable, more agile, more resilient, just like the body. I love that you
Yes.
kind of separated them out, but highlighted that the same process occurs for both.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Mm.
Um, and I think that that whole, like, being a beginner and always forcing yourself to be the beginner, also puts you in that real state of mindfulness all of the time, because when we're doing things that are come easily to us, it's very easy to be doing other things at the same time, or thinking about that shopping list, or thinking about the other thing that happened the other day that's really not relevant right now. And when you're a beginner and something is new, you're really paying so much attention, so much more attention to all the nuance of where my body is in space and what I'm doing in this moment. Like, you don't have time to think about all that other crap that really isn't relevant or necessary. I am really aware of how much time we spend up here in the thinking mind, in the past or the future, rather than actually just in the present in our body. And
that's so true.
So that being in those, as a beginner, being in that place where you're learning something new is really kind of forcing that, constant state of mindfulness. And what I've found, like, in picking up these two new activities that have been like quite a challenge, and there's
you
so
picked
much
some hard ones. You could have taken up knitting, but you went for roller skating and surfing, and some pretty tough stuff in the gym too. Not that knitting is probably easy. I can't knit. No. So any knitters out there, don't hate on me. It might be really difficult. I haven't knitted since I was about 7.
Yeah, no, me neither.
So you've already mentioned a sort of mental and emotional benefit of it being that it forces you to be in the moment and kind of reminds you how much of the time you're not in the moment, because, when you're competent in something, it just requires less brain power. Are there other kind of mental or emotional benefits that you've reaped from being a beginner at things again?
Yeah, I think like that, like patience, cultivating real sense of patience, diligence. Again, that relates back to the Abhyasa of just kind of showing up and doing it no matter what. Real sense of compassion for myself as well, because when you fail at something, it's very easy to go, well, I suck, I'm no good, and blah blah blah, story. But like, just reframing that and being like, but wow, like, I'm this age and I'm like doing all these amazing things, and like, I fell off, but what about that last wave that I caught? And I learned something new as I fell. So every time I fall now, rather than seeing it as a failure, I'm like, oh, that's just closer to that pathway of success. I'm that much closer to getting that skill, or that much closer to being more proficient. So it's really given me a sense of compassion for myself through the journey. And what else? Oh, a real sense of empathy for beginners who show up at my yoga classes, because I think that's another thing you take for granted, is that you just rock on up to a class and and then rocking up to so I went to my first skate class, which was an adult class, and I was like terrified. I was like, oh, who's going to be there? What am I going to look like? Am I going to fall? All of that kind of stuff. And then also when I went to my first, when I joined the squad and started going to the actual proper training nights for artistic skating, and there was like me and the rest of the group are all like 11 to 15-year-olds. So like being that real,
I've seen you in your unicorn onesie. I feel like there are some ways you could fit in with that crowd just fine.
But you just realize how daunting it is to be that new person, be that new kid on the block. And it just really made me realize, like, when people show up to my class and it's their first yoga class, how it's really important to make them feel really welcome and nurtured, and ask how they're going and support them through that journey, because otherwise it's terrifying. It's really scary.
You're so right. As kids, almost all of us, I think, are exposed to a really wide range of activities. There's this sense of, we don't know what you're going to be good at, so you'll do some kind of sport, and you'll do some kind of musical instrument, and maybe a language, and a whole heap of things. The kind of expectation is, as kids, we'll test out a whole bunch of things, and then once we figure out what we enjoy and what we're good at, the number of new things just decreases and decreases and decreases as we get older, doesn't it? So it's nowhere near as normal as an adult to expose yourself to something completely new. And I can really appreciate what kind of courage that might take, and all of the unwritten rules that when you're familiar in a space or an activity not being visible or understandable from the outside. Like even when you think about a yoga class, some studios, everybody comes in and they're completely quiet. Some studios, people will lie down in a specific shape or will sit in a specific shape. And if you're new, it just feels like everybody else has kind of gotten a signal that you didn't get. How did they all know whether this was a quiet studio or a noisy studio or a lying down one or a sitting up one? Or how did they know what props to get? Yeah, you're right. All of that sort of cultural stuff does become more apparent, doesn't it?
Yeah. And even like the languaging, like we probably don't realize it, but we have a specific way of talking when we're, instructing a yoga class. And
For
if you've
sure.
been to yoga many a times, that language makes sense. But when you go, I noticed that when I first went and tried other things and they're using, like cues, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. What are
How
you
do I draw
referring
my
to?
face back? I think we've all heard a cue where we're like,
trying to
what
kind
does
of
that mean? No, yeah, totally. You're right.
yeah. So it's well, I was also surprised about that, about how I guess comfortable I had gotten with the yoga languaging and all of the cues around that step into another space and they're using completely different cues and using the body in a slightly different way, and you're just like, oh, what? What? My knee goes in, not out. Like,
whoa,
what?
is that allowed?
I know, right?
So I guess my first
Yeah.
question leading on from that conversation would be, how has it changed the way you approach beginners who come to practice yoga with you? You said straight off the bat, you try to make them feel really welcome and check in with them a little bit to see how they're doing and how they're feeling. Because I guess some people will be nervous and maybe some people won't be.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a big thing for me, is just making sure they know where everything is, making sure that they know what props that they need, making sure they feel welcome and they know where to put, like this is where your shoes and your keys and just, like all of that stuff that we kind of take for
This is the
granted.
front of the room and that's the back of the room, just FYI. Yeah.
Yeah. All of that, like it seems really basic, but it's actually, quite important as a newbie to not feel like you don't know where those things are. And then in terms of like the language in the room, just making it like really welcoming and invitational. And, if you need to just lie down and visualize what I'm saying, that's totally fine. Like making sure that they don't feel like they have to do everything. And I always say, as they're checking in, I'm like, if anything doesn't make sense, just, put your hand up, give me a little wave, I'll come over and I'll give you a little bit more attention around anything. So usually they're pretty good because I've kept my language pretty simple these days.
Yes.
I've taken out like a lot of the kind of stuff that would bamboozle newbies. So
yes.
and
I
then
think
just
that's been a
checking in
common
at the
thing.
end as well.
Yeah, to see how they felt and how they went, any questions that came up.
Yeah. And then I usually, say, look, you did really well. You did it, so well. Just give them a little bit of positive reinforcement, because it's scary and it's nice to know that you did well, that you managed the class.
It's such a funny thing, isn't it? Yeah. Where I don't even know if it's really possible to do well or do poorly in a group yoga class, but you just want that bit of feedback that I didn't embarrass myself today. I'm at least what was expected of somebody coming to a class for the first time.
Exactly. And and that's kind of more what I mean by, they're doing well, because it's not that, you did the pose or whatever. It's
congratulations.
like,
you get a gold
you
medal. Yeah, exactly. You were brave. You came in. You didn't embarrass yourself. Great job. Yeah. I love that. And what else? When we take aside teaching beginners, you mentioned some languaging that you've picked up from other activities and just different cultural rules, like, oh, your knee's allowed to go in here, would your knee's not allowed to go in yoga practice. Has that kind of informed your teaching?
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
I figured.
Totally. So, in surfing, your knees are in valgus a lot of the time, because that's how you're kind of, landing on the board and steering the board.
So valgus meaning your knees not tracking above your ankles, but drifting in toward the midline of the body, which we all know in yoga means they will spontaneously combust at, a set period that we won't know in advance. Fascinating. Yes, carry on.
Exactly. And then within skating, so we do a lot of inversion and eversion of the foot in order to find the edges. And so like I had this whole new appreciation for how my feet actually work and how to like actually manipulate my feet to work, further up the chain, and how that would then, put me onto an edge to make me do a circle one way versus the other. And I just, picking up these sports, I was like, wow, I really don't use my feet that much in yoga. I kind of put them on the floor and I balance and I don't really
we
think
spread
much
our
more about.
toes and we even out the weight between the four corners and maybe lift our arches, and that's a tick, feet sorted.
Yep.
I love that. So it's as if you're getting this gateway as being a beginner to get to understand your body in a whole new way, which can then, take years of exploration in your yoga practice. What happens if I do that here? And how does it feel if I play with that here?
Yes,
Oh, I love
exactly. That. So what I've started doing in my practice, in my own personal practice, but also in the classes that I teach, is actually getting people to play with more valgus of the knee. What happens if you roll to the outsides of the feet? What happens if we walk on the outsides of the feet to the front of the back of the mat? Or that great one where you're like get up and down using the outer corners of your feet.
Yes.
So lots of play and, not sort of like being strict about this is where the foot has to be, or this is where the knee has to be. But what if we explore? What do you find if you're, moving your foot around? Where does your knee actually end up tracking? Does it go straight forward or does it go straight, slightly in? So way more, I guess, exploration and curiosity in the classes that I mean,
that's my love language right there. My partner teaches me all the time because he'll overhear me editing classes, and my most commonly used phrase, listen out for this, people, is how does it feel? How does that make you feel? Because that's, to me, takes a lot of the dogma out of the equation, and it takes a lot of that good or bad, right or wrong out of the equation, and opens you up, kind of takes the blinkers off to go, what happens if and how does that change if I now? That is, to me, the kind of self-study that you can really do in asana more easily than you can in a lot of places in life. And I love the fact that you've brought in a whole heap of new questions from simply exposing yourself to new activities that have different rules, different guidelines, different culture, different beliefs, different language.
Exactly. And it's, I think also just made me appreciate and be in awe of the human body and how much it can actually do, because when you are kind of following a dogma or rules, you can kind of get a little bit into sort of that fear mentality around it, and it's a little bit scary if I do this, or this might lead to XYZ. But when you expose yourself to all of these other sports and things that don't have that dogma, and the knees and the feet are doing all sorts of crazy things, then you're sort of like, wow, actually the human body is extremely resilient, and there's a lot that we can do
with the appropriate training.
Just about the appropriate training and the appropriate preparation. So
I love that. So that's, I'm sure, had a big flow-on effect into your teaching in terms of, as you said, being more invitational and more exploratory and more playful in the way that you teach. You also mentioned being more compassionate with beginners.
Yes.
Does the sort of flow-on effect of you being more compassionate with yourself also kind of translate from your experience of being a beginner, even in activities that you're a bit more familiar with, like practicing yoga and teaching yoga?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that overall compassion for myself is something that has grown throughout, this yoga journey. And, it is a part of that self-study. And, when you're sitting on the mat and you're in your meditation and you're noticing just how often you're perhaps going down that negative mindset, and then just recognizing that that is not reality. That is just a story, some skara that you've gotten probably from when you were little, from something that's happened and you just haven't let go of it. And so I think, yeah, this whole journey has just made me more aware of any time that I am going into any of those stories, and those stories that are not beneficial, and just kind of really coming back to that place of love for myself and love for this body and love for this chance to be a human on this planet at this time, and everything that entails. So
And maybe if you've
yeah.
had the experience of telling yourself that your knees can only go this way, and then you take them a different way and they're fine, then you get to bring some of that curiosity to those mental patterns as well. Like, all my life, I've been telling myself that I can only be X. And maybe
Mm,
that's true, but maybe it's not. I haven't actually tried being Y. So maybe I'll try
yeah,
being Y and see. Maybe it'll work out fine. Maybe it won't. But that sort of
exactly.
bleeding over effect of just being a little bit more curious and a little bit less dogmatic, I'm sure comes to those mental patterns too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have a great story about running. I had a big story about that for
Mm,
many years. That running was bad. I was no good at running, therefore I shouldn't run. It was bad for my joints. Blah 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 blah. Story, story, story.
mm,
And then one day I was like, hang on a minute. Why do I think this? Like, where does this all come from? And I couldn't really pinpoint it down. And I realized, like, running is actually a good activity. It's good
natural,
for spring. It's natural. It's good for
instinctive.
hydrating your disc. All of these like wonderful benefits. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm just going to try it. And so what I did was rather than going, well, I'm going to go out and do a 20-minute run, I was like, no, I'm gonna treat it like my meditation practice, which
Mm,
I hated meditation when I first started practicing yoga. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just be in that place of observation. And so I
mm,
started with 3 minutes a day
mm,
and slowly built it up. I think that's what actually Tiffany recommends in her meditation book, is just starting small and
mm.
building up. And so I thought, I'm going to do the same with running. So I started literally with 3 minutes. I jump on the treadmill, run for
Which
three
is a
minutes,
really long
jump off.
time if you don't run often, let me just say. 3 minutes feels like a 3-minute plank. Like,
Feels
it's a
like an
long
ages.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started like that. And then as soon as that felt, when I was on the treadmill and I'd done 3 minutes and my body was going, actually, you can do another two, I
Mm,
would slowly increase it. And then I'd, sit at 5 minutes. And then when my body was like, you know what, I can do another two, then I'd increase it to 7. And so slowly over time, I built up to then, nowadays I will run anywhere between maybe 5 kilometers and 7 kilometers is a kind of standard.
mm,
Um, and I love it. Like,
yeah.
it's incredible and it feels great. And you're out in nature and, you know, not every day is easy, a little bit like
Yeah.
yoga. Like sometimes you
Yeah.
go to the mat and you feel, like a big heavy lump and everything just feels hard. And some days that's how it feels to run. But once you've run, it feels so good afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think it's that, like we get so used to being comfortable in this
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Like if we're cold, we put the heater on. If we're hot, we put the air conditioning on. And, we've got, if we're bored, we pick it up with our phone and we scroll on social. Like there's all of these things to distract us from actually
Mm,
feeling uncomfortable, discomfort. Um,
yeah.
and I think, part of being a human being is you have to experience the discomfort. You have to be uncomfortable. And in those places of being uncomfortable is where the growth happens.
Yeah.
Um, and same with
Yeah.
pain. Like pain is kind of an interesting one, because I think there is a level of pain that we will all experience as human beings. And it's
Hmm.
that whole thing, like the pain is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. So
Yeah.
can we just be in the experience of pain without creating a big story around it? Um, and in that, there is the growth and the transformation. So,
Mm. I love that. And going back to your running story, you've hit on something there that I think could be really powerful for somebody like me who really likes their comfort zone and doesn't often expose themselves to new activities. Is one way to take that step that feels manageable is just small doses. I don't have to go to an adult skate class and, sign up for a whole semester. I could just try a couple of minutes of something see how it feels. And not only does that give me time to physically adapt to the demands of the new activity, it also gives me time to adapt my mental patterns as well, to go into that questioning of, oh, I thought I'd be terrible at this, and I'm pretty terrible, but I'm actually still having fun and enjoying myself. Or it's not as terrible as I thought it would be. Or, that 3 minutes went quicker than I thought. It gives you space for all of that kind of exploration. So maybe starting small is one tip. Do you have any other tips that you'd give to people who aren't you and aren't going to jump into, well, I'm going to learn how to surf, or I'm going to learn how to skate? Any other advice that you give to somebody who just wants to start dipping their toes into the water gently?
Yeah, I mean, definitely pick something that is inspiring you, So like if running's not your jam, maybe don't pick that. But if you're like, oh, roller skating, oh, surfing, oh, lifting weights or whatever, maybe start with something that there is a natural kind of draw
a reaction.
Yeah.
And even just a reaction of some sort, because I know some people are definitely, everyone should run or everyone should lift weights. And I always feel like when I hear should, part of me switches off immediately. But if there's a reaction of, oh, I don't think I could, or I know I'd be bad at, even that could be enough of a spark to go, well, maybe I'd test that out. But you're right. The easiest place to start is what sounds fun.
Yeah, what sounds fun. And then, because once you tackle those things that sound fun, but you're a little bit afraid of, then you're more likely to go, well, I've kind of had this aversion to weight training, but maybe I'll give it a try because that other thing actually surprised me. So, yeah, I would start with the thing that interests you first, and then maybe tackle the ones that are that you're more averse to.
Yeah.
And then I think for me, what I found really helpful is getting a coach or a trainer, or, like doing one-to-one sessions. And it's probably why I love teaching one-to-one yoga so much, is because it's so much easier if you're new at something, if you've got somebody who's alongside you, and you can have that dialogue, like, how is this feeling? What if we do it this way? Like, have you tried? There's a bit more scope for that than in a group scenario where there might be 20 other people, and there's less of that kind of one-to-one help and assistance.
And you're also walking the talk, given that this is what you do for a living, is, a lot of your teaching is focused on people individually. What have you learned from working with coaches or trainers one-on-one? Have you changed any of the ways that you teach your one-to-one yoga sessions?
I changed it. I think probably just, again, bringing more of that fun element into it. It doesn't always have to be serious and remedial, and, it's allowed to be fun. And so there's definitely, like when I'm working one-to-one with clients, there'll definitely be something that will be a little bit fun, a little bit of a fun challenge towards the end, rather than it all being, kind of the strict. I don't want to say strict, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think there is a natural gravity to yoga that sometimes we have to consciously work against, whether it's the expectation of students or the expectation coming from ourselves, or just the topics that we talk about are naturally kind of serious, like, being present, being in the moment, being focused. But you do that when you're having fun without even having to think about it. And you have to think about it a lot harder when you're not having fun.
Yes, exactly. And I think the other thing is less is more. Because I think when I first started teaching one-to-ones, I wanted to give good value for money.
Yeah.
So it was almost like pack as much in to the hour, so that they felt like they were getting value for money. But when you go off and be a beginner in that place yourself, you actually realize a lot of the time you're just repeating stuff, and it's quite nice just to repeat stuff and get better and better, and have another little cue to add and then try it again. And so I really stripped down, I think, in terms of how much I pack into a session to enable that curiosity, and what if we try it like this, and what if we try it like that, and now let's have a little kind of fun challenge here. And
and I think that really recognizes the fact that we only have so much capacity to take in new things. So if you want there to be a central takeaway or two, you do need time to repeat them and explore them in a couple of different ways for them to be able to be retained.
Totally.
I love that. That's
Totally.
great. So going back to tips for people who want to be more beginners, start with something that you are drawn to or that appeals to you or sounds fun. Don't hesitate to recruit the support of experts because they'll make the journey a lot easier for you and make the progressions faster by only telling you the things that you personally need to hear. Any other tips for people who are thinking of starting something new?
Probably maybe grab a buddy. It's
Yeah.
quite nice to have a buddy. I'm fortunate enough, apart from the surfing, most of the other things I've just actually gone out and tried on my own. But then in the process of that, then found a group of really cool people who are also into the same thing. And then, that's how it's kind of like you create a tribe
Yes.
almost like, or a group, a gathering of people that are interested in the same thing. And then it helps you improve, and it also helps you practice because people are like, oh, I'm out for a skate this afternoon. Would you like to come and join? And yeah, so you've got that kind of
Community support.
community
Camaraderie.
support. Yeah,
Yeah.
camaraderie. That's the word I was looking
love
for.
that.
Yeah.
So kind of translating from being actual beginners back to beginner's mind, you've talked about some of the skills that you've picked up and some of the lessons that you've learned from being new at things. The challenge is now, how do we apply that to things that we're not new at anymore? So how do you bring that presence and that self-compassion and empathy and curiosity and lack of fear of failure back into something that you're much more familiar in, like your yoga practice?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's so easy when we've been doing something for ages to tune out. So what I tend to do now is I'll pick something in particular. So, for instance, the other day I was feeling a little bit stiff in my lower back. So I was like, oh, I want to do something mobilizing the low back. So rather than it just being kind of a straight yoga flow as such, I was like, okay, what happens if I play with, my hip point and my shoulder coming to look at one another? And then, okay, what happens if I do that in different poses? So then I just kind of got on my mat and played around with, warrior two, creating this connection, extended side, and just found different ways, rolling from my belly into like a wild thing, but creating that diagonal relationship. So it's like picking almost like a drishti, a focus, and then really honing your skill with the poses around. So rather than it being just warrior two and you kind of going through all the checklist of
this is how you do warrior two.
Like, yeah, warrior two, what happens if I do this? Warrior two, what happens if I do this? Oh, where do I feel that? Oh, that's a yummy stretch. I'm going to stay here for a little bit. And then it kind of just cultivates this real like inward curiosity for, oh wow, this is interesting.
If you were a chef, it would be like a deconstruction. So you've taken something, apple crumble that everybody's had, or apple cobbler, maybe it is in the US. I'm not sure what a crumble is for you guys, but taking something that is really known and familiar and taking the pieces apart and kind of examining each one of them in a little bit more detail to create a freshness to it and a novelty to it that invites you to have that presence and curiosity and to think less about this is how it's done and more, what do I feel if I try it this way? And what changes if I change that slightly? I love that. I think that's a great tip.
Yeah. It's so like, it's just blowing my mind in terms of like the practice because, every time I come to the mat now, it's new, because there's something new to explore. It's like, oh, what happens if I do the whole practice, focusing more on the outer edge of my foot? And how does that change, how I connect with the earth? And so it just creates that freshness that keeps you in the moment and, creates that beginner's mind and that opportunity to really drop into flow state because there's just enough challenge and newness, for like everything to kind of align and you be in that moment. So
I love that. And that really does away with my least favorite question as a yoga teacher, which is when somebody says, am I doing it right? I'm like, I'm just so uninterested in whether you're doing it right or not. What I'm curious about is, today I'm focusing on pelvic tilt. Can you feel the pelvic tilt? Can you feel the difference if you do anterior versus posterior pelvic tilt? I don't care if it's right. I just want you to live in your body and notice how you can change what you feel by changing even the littlest thing, like the
Totally.
the position of your foot, or the weight on your foot, or the position of your pelvis. And it does kind of take away a lot of that restricting dogma and just get people curious again. I think that's a great tip. I
Absolutely.
love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so much more refreshing also teaching classes like that, I find, because like people are just so in their bodies, like, working out how that feels for them. And less, it's less of having to worry about where the foot is and where this is, and because they're in it. And then, it's so cool.
I love that. And I think that's a beautiful way of bringing together everything that you've spoken about today, about having that mental freshness that we think about when we think about beginner's mind, and a level of focus and concentration because it's new and you're having to think about it for the first or the second time. And also about all of the resilience and adaptability that you spoke about earlier, that if we only expose ourselves to the same kinds of challenges, then we're only prepared for those challenges. And the wider the range of challenges we expose ourselves to, the more resilient and adaptable we become. I think that's fantastic. Any final tips or takeaways that you want to leave people with?
Tips or takeaways? Oh, my favorite quote. Actually, I don't get it so I don't muck it up, because sometimes I do.
Yeah, especially with your favorite quote, which you're like, oh, I say it all the time.
And then I muck it up. Do we get old because we stop playing, or do we stop playing because we get old? I think it's just I always think about that, because I'm like, oh yeah, if we kept on playing like we did as children, imagine what would be possible.
I think about that a lot in the context of balance, because there is this belief that balance just automatically decreases as we get older. And maybe some of that happens because of changes to vision, or changes to the, elasticity of the vestibular system, or the, connective tissue health in the ligaments of the feet. But from what I've seen in people, that is a very small percentage of it. And you can make up for those small percentages of change by just exposing yourself to a wider range of balance challenges regularly, like we do when we're kids, and you see if you can walk along the top of the fence. And I was not an athletic kid, and even I did a whole bunch of that kind of experimentation.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I love that.
So yeah, I think that's my takeaway is just, whenever you kind of sit in that place where you're in your comfort zone and you're afraid to try something, just kind of remember that.
I'm getting old here.
Well, not that you're getting old, but it's like, it's a mindset, right? It's
for sure. And all I have to do is change the mindset. I love that. So where would you send people who want to know more about you and more about what you do?
Yeah, awesome. So I've got obviously Facebook, which I think is under Yoga with Kylie. My Instagram is Yoga with Kylie. My website is kylierook.com. And on there, you'll also find my online platform, which has a lot of classes with a lot of what we've talked about. A lot of that experimentation, a lot of fun. I'm in Auckland. If you're in Auckland, New Zealand.
Kind of looks from the backdrop for anyone watching on YouTube as if she's in Japan in the early spring, but she is in Auckland, and well worth a follow on social media. If you're a teacher and you just want to pick up some of that sort of exploratory sequencing, you share a bunch of sequences and just ideas of ways to play with a concept and stretch it out in that deconstruction fashion. We'll link to all of those links in the show notes, as well as your guest teacher page on Yoga Medicine Online for people who are members there and want to test out some of your classes. So thank you so much for giving us your time today and sharing that fresh approach with us all.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our yoga medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.